Chef Spike. That was a really great presentation. You will have an opportunity to try both the lion's mane jackfruit cakes and the mushroom bolognese today at lunch. And then also too, tomorrow night at 5:30 here at Copia, we have the Food is Life celebration continuing with Chef Spike will be hosting the Inn at Little Washington documentary that he helped produce for PBS. And there will be a wine and hors d'oeuvre sampling after that, and you will get all the time in the world to talk to him. And so tickets are online at CIA at Copia /Food is Life. And so let's go ahead and thank him, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Allison Ryder, who's the Director of Health and Sustainability Programs, and my counterpart in Hyde Park.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Chef Spike, for kicking us off this morning. It's my pleasure to be here from our Hyde Park campus and to introduce our next general session. When we were thinking about building this program and the chefs to feature, and how we might describe what's happening in Plant Forward America in 2020. You heard yesterday from Chef Shinari in New York City, and we wanted to include both the kind of East Coast and West Coast perspectives. So after hearing about the vegan soul food restaurant in New York, today you're going to be hearing from Chef Kyle Connaughton, who co-owns the 3 Michelin-starred SingleThread farm restaurant in Healdsburg, with his wife and farmer Katina Connaughton, so ultimate power couple in food. And unfortunately, they were planning on being here in person, but due to a variety of reasons, including a duct fire that closed down SingleThread for most of last month, and just a variety of just what a lot of industry folks are living through right now of the struggles, they had to pull out last minute. So fortunately, Kyle was still willing to zoom in and present virtually and share some of his insights and inspiration from SingleThread and their newest, more casual plant-based restaurant that just opened up on Friday on Earth Day called Little Saint in Healdsburg. So we're really excited. And I see Kyle, you're here. Welcome on the big screen. We all see you. We're so sad that you're not with us in person, but we're going to allow you to share some of your slides, and then hopefully we'll have a couple minutes for Q&A. So Chef Kyle, over to you. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I am apologies for not being there in person. We had a really great session planned for today, and I'm sorry that we couldn't do it, but wanted to give just a little bit of perspective and thoughts on some of the things that we're doing here in Healdsburg, which is just over about an hour from where you all are now, west in Sonoma County, and. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to just kind of dive right in and just talk a little bit about the work that we're doing in the more sort of plant-based space, both at SingleThread, which I'll focus on, today. As I mentioned, we've now opened a completely vegan restaurant called Little Saint, which is a restaurant, a retail store, a coffee bar, a grab and go, a music and speaking and events venue, and a wine shop and produce store and floral shop, and it's a lot of different things. So very busy and really excited to bring that here to our town in Sonoma County and continue to sort of showcase the amazing work that my wife is doing on her farm. So we have a 24-acre farm, just a few minutes from both restaurants. The 2 restaurants are 1-minute walk from each other. And my wife runs that farm there with a farm team and grows on a good portion of the 24 acres of our new farm to supply both restaurants. And then additionally, you have another 5-acre farm that's dedicated solely to Little Saint, as well as supporting a lot of other farms in the area. At SingleThread, we offer a 10-course menu each night. We see 64 guests every evening. It's guest pre-book on Talk. It's a pre-booked, prepaid for experience, so that once guests arrive, they can just come and enjoy. They don't have to think about anything else except for their wine selections for the evening. Even that they can arrange ahead of time. So it really allows for us as a restaurant to know exactly the guests that are coming, exactly the dietary preferences and restrictions they have, and know, what we'll be cooking that evening. So there are no choices on the menu. We just prepare the menu for that evening. 12% of our guests request a vegetarian or vegan year, and that's a 2% year over year increase. And so that's definitely something that we continue to see as, I don't want to say as a trend. I just think it's a movement. And also we work very hard, as I'm going to explain now, on our vegetarian vegan menus. And I think people who have a vegetarian or vegan menu share that experience with other vegetarians and vegans, and encourage them to come and try out the experience, because oftentimes it can be difficult, to find experiences for vegetarian and vegan guests that they feel are on the same par as the more omnivore menus in restaurants. So it's interesting to see that growth, to have that growth, and we love to see it, and we're very proud to cook vegetarians and vegan meals. And our menu is really predominantly vegetables anyways, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes here. But we are a predominantly plant-based restaurant, and because of our farm and because of our agriculture and the seasons that we are very fortunate to have here in Sonoma County, where we can farm all year round, we're always driven by what is happening in terms of the produce and the expression of the farm at any given time. So we don't look at an animal protein as the center of the plate and build around it. We look at the produce and we figure out what we want to do, and if we do want to add any seafood or small amounts of meat to that. And this right here, this photo is the first course. This is how guests actually arrive to the dinner. When they sit down at their table, we've built that just like a moment before they arrive, and they sit down to their first course, which is individual plates and some shareable items that really express that moment in time. So my wife grows all over the floral at the farm as well, and gathers things from the wild, like you see moss and lichen and things in there. So it's very much an expression of that day. So as I said, our menus are very produce driven, as they are. We're trying to kind of change that narrative from being about the center of the plate being an animal protein that you do sauce and vegetables and garnish around, and change that to say, what do we have at the farm right now? What does the harvest look like, and how is that driving what we do? So first and foremost, that's really the star of the show. And really what we are doing every day is telling the story of today. So we have a harvest every morning at the farm. It comes into starts at 5 a.m., comes into the restaurant at 11 a.m. The chefs arrive at that time, and they essentially are arriving in the kitchen at the same time as the produce. And that produce is essentially immediately used for the menu that evening, and very little of it is carried over unless we have some sort of multi-day preparation. The produce is ordered every day for that day, and we serve it that day. And so in anticipation of what's coming, the culinary team and the farm teams are working very closely hand in hand to make sure that we're utilizing all of the produce that it's at its peak season, and that we're creating dishes that show different techniques, different flavors, and have completely different qualities to it, so that the guest has a very well-rounded experience, but that narrative for the guest is always about today. This is today, what's happening on our farm in Sonoma County. This is what is in season at that moment and at its peak ripeness. So creatively, it's less of an expression of me as a chef saying, this is what I want to do creatively, and it's more an expression of my wife as a farmer saying, this is what I deem is best, and this is when it's ready, and this is when I want you to use it. And then we figure out, really based on the properties of it, how to use it. So just want to keep track of my time here. It's a big part of then the process of what we do is really about where sort of hospitality meets creativity, and where that sort of handshake is there. As I said, we pre-book, guests prepay, and we have this opportunity to have essentially a 2-month time window to create a dialogue with our guests, to really reach out to them about dietary restrictions, allergies, aversions, but also celebrations and preferences and all kinds of things like that. So really we're front loading that conversation to understand the guests. If are they vegetarian, are they vegan, are they pescatarian, do they have an oyster allergy, do they not like beets, or whatever the case may be. And we really give guests a lot of space to be able to say over a computer, over an email, how they feel about different things, and then we really react accordingly. So when they arrive in our home, they really feel like they're a guest at their dinner party in our home, and they don't have to go through a conversation about their lactose intolerance or whatever, feel like a fussy eater because they don't like beets and broccoli or whatever the case may be. And so it really allows for us to have to put hospitality first and allow guests just to have an experience, and just create menus for them that are all based on what it is that they've told us in advance. So they don't have to have any worry or anticipation or awkward conversations or start conversations at the table about whatever it is. We can sort of like slip right into the experience and go from there. So in this way, we really try to make dietary preferences, which I don't consider vegetarian and vegan menus as restrictions. These are preferences. These are lifestyle choices. And then restrictions would consider things what we need to really be look out for, which would be, allergies and nut allergies and any cross-contamination and those kinds of things. So we try to make that a really enjoyable process. And this is a dish right here on the right that really sort of expresses actually the relationship between sunchokes and sunflowers, 2 plants that we grow on our farm. And so they're actually related. In sunflowers, we eat the seed part, and sunchokes, we eat the root part, but it's a very similar plant. But it's sort of interesting that we eat the 2 different ends of essentially what is a very similar plant. So this is kind of a bit of a story about the season, expressing the visual, obviously, of the sunflower here, sunchokes in different forms, sunflowers in different forms. But underneath that thin little black crisp, on the vegetarian version of this dish, there's a kind of a mousseline that's made from cashew, and under the omnivore dish, it's a very, very similar mousseline that's made from duck livers, from one of the few actual land animal proteins that we serve. Our ducks that we raise here with a family called Oz family here in Sonoma, and they raise a variety of duck for us called the Duclair duck. And so we're utilizing the whole animal there. So, the idea here is which I'm going to get into next, is that the guests are having the same experience. There is no lesser than style of experience. It's about the same, or even sort of like elevating the experiences when preferences and restrictions are at play at the table. So for us, our menu development protocols, developing dishes, we consider every alternate. So when we put a new dish on the menu, which is all the time, and we don't have any signature dishes, the menu is changing constantly. We are always developing and considering every possible alternative to that dish, and whether it will mean the creation of an entirely new dish in that slot, or if it will be a modification of the dish if needed. So every time we have a checklist, a dish is not one dish. It's developing a dish that is making sure that we have a vegetarian version, a vegan version, a no raw version, if it's a raw food item, a pescatarian version, dairy-free, gluten-free, kosher-friendly, and then any allergy alternates, if there's nuts, if there's shellfish, if there's any of these things. So the only dietary restriction we can't accommodate is no soy, just because the high prevalence of soy products like soy sauce and miso in our cuisine, and it's very deep into our food, so it's very difficult to maneuver out and actually have the flavor of what we do at SingleThread. But other than that, we're able to handle any dietary restriction and sort of any laundry list of restrictions or or vegetables where we're there to accommodate that. So as I said, the upfront information and communication and minimizing table conversation regarding preferences is very important. And we always have backup alternates ready to go, anticipating all of those things and not being caught off guard. And really, again, having this guests in our home mentality where we don't go into every day with this mentality that we're running the 3 Michelin-star restaurant. We go into every day saying, this is our home, and these are guests who are coming to a dinner party in our home, and we're here to take care of them. And that sort of expresses itself in this menu design, in our hospitality, and even in the physical design of the space, where our kitchen is completely open and part of the dining room and part of the dining experience, and we have this interaction with our guests. So, for us, creativity and hospitality kind of go hand in hand with the plant-based menu. I was talking a little bit about sort of no lesser than experience and trying to have, an equal to or greater than experience, particularly with our vegetarian and vegan menus. On the dish on the left, right here is a dish that's on the menu right now, or when we reopen from our fire closure. That is essentially like a porridge of rice. It's with different vegetables, turnips and radishes from the farm, braised kombu and wild anago. And then we pour with that a broth of the anago cooking liquid, which is an eel. On the right, this is the vegetarian version of this same course slop. This is caramelized grains of a grain of purple barley that we grow at our farm, with all of those same vegetables, and kind of cooked almost like an onigiri, Japanese onigiri, yaki onigiri, where it's grilled on one side. And then we serve with that a broth that's made of hearth roasted vegetables that get smoky and sort of very meaty and sort of a deeply umami broth. So you kind of see the sort of playfulness of the expression of 2 dishes in the same slot. On the left, this is the fresh rice, harvested rice. It's called shinmai, which means like the new crop rice. Is shown on the left is kind of indicating what's there on the dish, and on the right is some of the grain in there. We're sort of telling the agricultural story that it relates to the dishes individually. So not only sort of dish and dish size and portion size and sort of wine pairing, because we need to align with wine pairings as well, but also visually and the storytelling, the agricultural storytelling is part of the mix as well. So that's kind of showing this kind of like an equal to, trying to have a like for like experience. So, very often we have tables, say a party of 4, where 3 guests at the table have an omnivore diet and 1 person has a vegetarian or vegan diet. And so there is this sort of almost singling out that can be felt at the table, and the sort of a rating as to how well their meal stands up to the sort of omnivore. And a feeling, I think, amongst diners and vegetarian diners, and a sensitivity that restaurants like ours sort of care less, or that cooking for them is some sort of chore or an afterthought. And we really want to flip that script and take a lot of pride and a lot of love and a lot of joy into cooking, for the vegetarian in vegan diets, and just having lots of vegetarian courses for everybody in there as well. So many of our courses are vegetables only. So, oftentimes what we want to do is we want to feel for that solo vegetarian guest at the table, we want them to feel that their menu is elevated rather than an afterthought, if maybe that they've experienced before. So we try to find things that are special for those vegetarian guests that the other guests will not see, that that will be envious of their dish. And since it is 12% of our guests, we can take a little bit more time creatively to do a little bit more elaborate presentations, like the mushroom presentation on the left, to actually be able to wheel that out to the guest and make a presentation where we can combine all the different mushrooms and the homemade tofu and different garnishes and cook that for them into an individual hot pot style of dish. So while the other guests at the table may be receiving a dish that's plated and put in front of them, the vegetarian guest is getting a kind of more preferential type of experience, and then we're sort of drawing that them into it. So that's just a part of the feeling of hospitality. And it doesn't need and shouldn't be for every dish, but it's definitely a moment that we like to have, or moments that we like to have within the dining experience for those guests.
Kyle, I hate to interrupt you here, but we are running short on time. So if
Yep.
you wouldn't mind just wrapping up and offering some parting thoughts and maybe sharing
No
just
problem.
that
I'm showing 3 minutes here. Do I have 3 minutes?
We can do 3 minutes. Fair enough. Okay.
Well, yeah, I said
if we're able to offer or see if there's any questions as well too. So I'll let you wrap up in the next minute or two. We'll see if there's a question and then and go from there.
Yeah, no problem. This is my last slide.
Fantastic.
This is kind of another sort of showcase here, in that we have a sashimi dish on the left, with these fall flavors of persimmon and everything, and then on the right, a persimmon dish that's stuffed with persimmon and grilled yuba, so tofu skin and greens from our farm. So just sometimes too is a little bit more elaborate in presentation to, again, give that vegetarian guest that feeling of receiving something special and doing something elaborate that maybe would be potentially difficult for us to do for the entirety of the dining room. So yeah, lastly, just in closing, I think myself and other chefs who are thinking this way, and certainly Daniel Hume and 11 Madison Park, who's taken this to the next level, I think what we're really doing is trying to help kind of guests feel the value of plants in the plant-based menu. I mean, historically, fine dining restaurants have been all about the exotic proteins, or the fish or the caviar, the foie gras or whatever, and we're working to maneuver the conversation, and so that guests feel really the value of the plants and the value of good agricultural systems, and and that these things also have value. It doesn't always have to be fancy proteins from wherever. So that's it for me. Let me know if I can answer any questions.
Do you want to just give us a quick snapshot of how things are going with Little Saint and how you've transitioned and created this more casual concept?
Yeah, I mean, Little Saint was really about having something that was more casual, that you can go to more frequently, more accessible. We moved from a 5-acre farm that we were leasing, and we purchased a 24-acre farm. So my wife's agricultural footprint grew by almost 5 times. So, we really were looking for an outlet to have the same produce that we serve at SingleThread in a much more casual way, and something more that the community here in Healdsburg could participate in, as well as the visitors. So we had an amazing opportunity to collaborate with a great family and the great Ken Folk, the designer, and his foundation, and everything actually goes back to Ken Folk's arts foundation. So it kind of has a mission beyond just plant-based cooking, which is kind of a longer story. But it's been great this week, and it's been really fun to to have creatively. And we're really focusing on plants. We're really not trying to replicate meat or use meat analogs. It's really not the purpose. We're here in Sonoma. We have a farm. We can farm all year round, and so it's really focusing on highlighting the vegetables themselves rather than trying to replicate meat that's not there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Chef Kyle. We hope that we can bring you back in person. And we have a group of our Farm to Table students who it sounds like they're going to be visiting SingleThread in the farm, so you'll be able to see them. So just one more round of applause for Chef Kyle and his amazing vision.
Have a great conference, everyone.
Thank you so much. Take care. Okay, so now we're going to transition into the next general session. So it's my pleasure to introduce Chef Mark Erickson, who is the provost of the CIA, also based in our Hyde Park campus, where he oversees all aspects of the college's academic programs, as well as branch campuses, food and beverage operations, and consulting. And as a certified master chef with an incredible pedigree of both academic and industry experiences, he's going to now lead us into a discussion surrounding the art and science of flavor architecture and deliciousness by design. So Provost Erickson, over to you.
Thank you, Allison, and good morning, everyone. I'm sure it's the same for you as it is for me. It's for those of you who have been to our campuses here in California in the past for these conferences, it's such a delight to be back after the past couple of years. It's an exciting time for the industry to try to get ourselves back up on our legs and to try to figure out where do we go from here. And I think the topic of plant-forward cooking and what do our customers want and need for the future is probably one of the most preeminent things that we're thinking about and trying to figure through. And even that filters into situations like we have here at the CA, which is we're trying to prepare students for a future in an industry that's in constant state of change, but really being accelerated over the past couple of years and into the future. So trying to navigate this idea is where is food going and how do we address the needs that people used to think of as being their need, and what do we want and need for them to have in the future, while we're trying to address dietary issues, the issues of sustainability and the needs of the planet and those kinds of things. So it's a lot to comprehend and a lot to try to navigate. And as a part of it, one of the key things that we've been really focused on is this concept of deliciousness. And I know when you put out the word deliciousness, people sometimes kind of think of it as being a frivolous word. It's a word that sort of has been bantered around many, many times, and people don't really put the weight to it that we're placing on currently, because what we're all really searching for, I think everybody here in this audience, is that we are in search of trying to find what are the things that people will decide as being delicious, and why does that matter? So really our discussion this morning is to kind of think about what are the avenues, what are the pathways that we can use to go on this discovery for deliciousness, because I think in that we will learn along the way. So this is not meant to be so much a prescription as to what we should be doing, but to open up a conversation about how we might go on this discovery path together as an industry and as a group of professionals trying to deal with a changing world and changing consumer behaviors and habits. So I'm going to be introducing a couple of co-presenters this morning as a part of this session, folks who I'm sure you know well, but while they need no introduction, I'll be introducing them just prior to each of them giving their portion of the presentation. But I want to give a little framing to this conversation this morning. And first of all, the idea of deliciousness, and let's start with why is delicious important? More so than just the fact that people like having things that are delicious, but why is it important strategically? And so, deliciousness is really incredibly important because, as we all know, the idea and the concept of how we frame what's delicious is really something that's a manifestation that happens in our brains, our brains, our guest brains, and those kinds of things. And the reality is that deliciousness really is a description of something that is driving us in this idea of hedonic state, or something where we are drawn to, or we're seeking pleasure and satisfaction. And the idea of something that's pleasurable, people will do incredible things for. It motivates behavior. And so one of the things is we try to seek deliciousness as a industry and as a profession. What we want to do is we're trying to seek deliciousness coming from items that will support what we're trying to do strategically, both from a dietary perspective and from a planetary perspective. And if we can motivate behavior that supports both of those strategic needs, then we have found the magic path. And so one of the ways that we've been looking at this as an industry, and this goes back quite some time, is this idea of what are the food-liking behaviors that people seek out or react to that support what it is that we're trying to accomplish. And with that, it all happens, again, in the brain. Everything that we process, everything that we react to happens in the brain. I'm certainly no brain surgeon by any means, but the brain is a pretty complex piece, and we're still trying to understand all of the different aspects of how food is processed. But one of the things that's important to note is that eating is one of the very few activities that uses all 5 of our senses. And in that, describes a little bit about how complex it is to make something that's truly delicious, especially when you are trying to do it strategically. So with that, when we think about what people automatically, for the most part, respond to when something is delicious, we have some models of things that people would pick up and say, ooh, that was delicious. And they're sort of responding in that frivolous sense. But when you think about something like a chocolate truffle, now there may be a few people out there that would take a bite of a chocolate truffle and not like chocolate truffles, but for the most part, when somebody reacts to something that's delicious, it might be a little tidbit of something like a chocolate truffle. And that initial reaction of, ooh, that's really delicious, is not only the fact that it's initial response to the flavors itself, but it's sort of the satisfaction that one gets by eating something that seems to be, to some degree, a little bit over the top, and a little bit exciting, and a little bit fun, and a little bit of decadence. That goes along with that. So in terms of a chocolate truffle, it might be delicious at the first bite, but as I learned when I was working with the first chef after I graduated from culinary school, there's a very important part of something that's delicious just with the first bite, and what happens to the satisfaction that one's get as one continues to consume that. And this whole idea of diminishing returns, which is really the sort of the wedge behind the movement towards tasting menus, because the idea that something might taste delicious with a small bite, but the more you eat of it, it becomes less and less satisfying, even to the degree that you actually, over time, can develop an aversion to what was initially delicious. So this idea of delicious is very complex, not only in terms of the initial taste, but how does it develop and how does one respond to that over the course of time as one's eating it. The other idea of what's delicious is that sometimes it's less about taste and more about how it makes you feel. And I'm sure that there's a number of folks that after some days at work, this looks pretty delicious, even though it's just ice cream, but it's this idea of how does food make us feel. And so the emotional side of food is oftentimes a significant part of what makes things delicious. And so along with that, it probably leads us to this. And if it weren't for the emotional aspects or the idea of these sort of decadence concepts that we've been talking about, these probably wouldn't exist. And the reality is that there's a pretty vast industry out there of folks that understand how we react to food and flavors and deliciousness emotionally and in the brain, that have leveraged those opportunities to great success in order to create, whether it's the snack food industry or the fast food industry. They understand how we react to the concept of delicious. And the idea is for us as an industry, as we talk about trying to move towards a more plant-forward menu, again, for dietary needs and for planetary needs, how do we do that where we can make the reactions of food in our brain crave plant-based foods, more vegetables, and things that give us the same kind of degree of satisfaction and excitement and pleasure, but using the right kinds of products that support our strategy. So in terms of delicious, once we've talked about why it's important, because we're trying to strategize towards steering an entire movement of people eating more plant-based foods, then we can talk about how. And so one of the ways in talking about how we can understand this concept of when we go seeking for delicious is to look at it from a scientific lens. And the idea of using science to support the idea of passing towards or moving towards more plant-based foods, it's been around for a while. The idea of understanding the sensory excitement of enjoying food has been around for a long time. It's been known historically that the 5 senses have been a part of enjoyment of food for many, many years. And in fact, it's led to a number of different scientific adventures in order for us to better understand what makes food taste good. So some of you, or maybe many of you, when you were in grade school, you might have gone through an experiment where there was this sort of taste mapping of the tongue and trying to stimulate flavors on different areas of the tongue. And this was replicated many times. It's been around for many, many years, goes back to the 20s. The reality is that the science that really is behind this idea, to some degree recently has been completely debunked. Not that we don't taste, and we don't taste in certain areas, but the idea that the tongue was broken up into sections and areas of the tongue where we taste certain things really it doesn't work that way. The idea of taste is much more complex than that. So as we talk about the complexity of flavor, there's been other models that have been posed. This idea of what are the basic tastes and how do they interplay with each other? How do they react and respond to each other in order to make something that tastes delicious? And so there's been a variety of models that have been looked at. Some of them are relatively simple, as the one you see on the screen here. Sometimes they get a little bit more complex, and I know that we're not the only industry that's been seeking this idea of what's delicious. The wine industry has been looking at this for quite some time. Our colleagues up at UC Davis developed this concept of the flavor wheel, which has been reapplied to many other aspects of the food and beverage industry, but this idea that flavor, which is made up of not only taste but also aromas, is very, very important. And trying to understand the concept of how aromas work together in order to make something taste good is very, very important in the wine industry, and certainly is being applied now in the food industry to try to understand how do we break down the concept of aromas into compatibility that makes things taste good. Those models have been evolved into various kinds of things, such as different bubble charts that show the interconnectivity of different flavor profiles and aroma profiles and how they work. They get incredibly complex sometimes. This is not one that I would necessarily try to map to, but it's probably accurate, but I'm not really sure what we do with it other than sort of admire the complexity of how complex flavor and deliciousness might be. And in fact, there has been an entire study done by computer scientists. The folks at IBM Watson a number of years ago went down a pretty deep path looking at what they call cognitive cooking. We're looking at this idea of what aromas went well together and how does one use some kind of algorithm to predict compatibility of flavors, mostly hinging across the idea of aromas being the major component of flavor. It came out with some interesting results. I can only share with you that there was quite a bit of dialogue about the value of what Watson generated, especially when the idea of mixing caviar and white chocolate was one of the recommendations that the algorithm produced. I'm not really sure that wants me to sit down and enjoy that as a meal, but the idea of looking at algorithms and aromas and working together seems pretty complex and might be something that's worth looking at, but I'm not sure that by itself it's going to tell the entire story. And so from a scientific side, there may be some options there for us to look at, but then there's also the more practical side, and it might be a more ethnographic side, and that is to look at foods that just by their virtue are plant-based and already deemed to be delicious by a vast population that might be from a certain region or part of the world. And in fact, it doesn't take a whole lot of words, really just pictures, to describe that the world of plant-based foods that already exist, that are delicious, are pretty vast already and deserve continued exploration in order for us to really find the ideas that might push us forward. So no need to describe this, and in fact, we're going to have somebody who lives in this world and is very knowledgeable about that as a part of our panel this morning. So with that, what we'd like to do is just to have a discussion about this idea of what can science and what can the study of dishes that by their virtue are plant-based and delicious already, what can we learn from that and what can we use as inspiration from that? And I'm pleased to introduce two individuals who are probably the best on the planet to help us understand that to a greater degree. First of all, joining us virtually is Chef Ali Bouzari. Ali is a PhD and a culinary scientist. He's an author, educator, and co-founder of Pilot R&D, a culinary research and development company, and Render, a new food company that collaborates with the best restaurant chefs in the country to reinvent the way food lovers eat. As a chef with a PhD in food biochemistry, Ali has helped to lead the change in changing the way we think about cooking by teaching and developing curriculum at the top universities, from Ivy League schools to here at the Culinary Institute of America, and collaborating with the country's most innovative restaurants, including State Bird Provisions, Bennu, 11 Madison Park, the restaurant at Meadowood, and the Thomas Keller Restaurant Group. Allie has been featured on Forbes' Zaggett's 30 Under 30 lists as a contributor to Popular Science, Wired, Savour, and Eater, and as a guest expert on NPR, TEDx, The Splendid Table, Cooking Channel, and Iron Chef America. His book, Ingredient, Unveiling the Essential Elements of Food, won the 2017 IACP Award for Best Reference Book. Allie also writes a monthly column for the San Francisco Chronicle called Housemaid. So Allie's going to join us virtually. And our additional presenter this morning, somebody who is no stranger to the CI and has been a part of our programs at Greystone for many years and a big part of the world of food, Chef David Tanis is a chef partner at Lulu, located at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, as well as currently writes the weekly City Kitchen column for the New York Times. He is the author of A Platter of Figs and Other Recipes, chosen as one of the 50 best cookbooks ever by the Guardian Observer. Heart of the Artichoke and Other Kitchen Journeys, nominated for a James Beard Award, One Good Dish, and David Tanis Mark of Cooking. His professional cooking career has spanned 3 decades. David has had a long association with Alice Waters at Chez Panisse in Berkeley, California, where he worked as chef of both at the Upstairs Cafe and the Downstairs Restaurant. He has overseen kitchens throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. He's ran successful private supper club in a 17th century walk-up in Paris, France. He's passionate about simple seasonal home cooking, real food. He finds inspiration in the fresh offerings at farmers markets. David has been featured in Savour, Gourmet, Town and Country, and 7 by 7, among many other publications. His writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal and Fine Cooking, and he resides in Los Angeles, California. So first what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask David Tanis to join us on the stool here in the front. And with that, I'm going to join David on stool. I'm going to turn the podium over to Chef Ali Bouzari, who has a few slides to represent the presentation that he would like to give. So Chef Tanis, if you join me. Ali, are you there?
Hello, hello.
Hi, Chef. How are you today?
Good. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
All right. So off to the races. My day job boils down to helping chefs, food companies, everybody in between figure out how to make food in whatever environment you can fit into. One of the most useful tools in that whole exchange is having a shared vocabulary so that we can talk about what we're trying to tackle in a precise way. So we've got 10 minutes right now. This is going to be a ludicrous fast couple glossary terms before we jump into discussion around plants. Number one, flavor. Mark touched on this a little bit already, but this remains one of the most unhelpfully underdefined words in all of food. A deep dive into what flavor is a topic for another day. But for now, let's leave it at flavor as Mark very eloquently put. All of your senses funneled through all of the emotional baggage that you got going on in your head. So your mood, your memories, and the way you grew up, and where your attention is focused right now, all of that stuff will refract and angle and stilt whatever you're tasting, and give you the final result. That snapshot of that moment in time and who you are is flavor. Next couple terms, one word, 2 capitalization conventions. Lowercase I ingredients are things that we're all super familiar with. Brisket, popcorn, blueberries, onions, collard greens. Capital I ingredients are the fundamental building blocks that all food is made from. So things like water, sugars, protein, lipids, etc. My colleagues and I in R&D, one of the number one things that we are asked all the time, interviews, panel discussions like this, and so on, is, hey, what's the new ingredient? What secret ingredients do you have up your sleeve? What things are out there that we can discover? And I think there's 2 ways to answer that. For lowercase I ingredients, Sure, it's possible that there's some bean, some flour, something out there that will come in and maybe catch on, maybe get into mainstream food, maybe bring something new to the table in what small way it can. An uncomfortable reality of food is that when it comes to capital I ingredients, there isn't anything riding out of the night to save the day and completely change the game. This is what we have. There is a finite, limited pantheon of building blocks of food, and it's not going to change, which means that 50 years from now, we're still going to be beholden to the same rules of what proteins can do and what proteins can't do as we are today, as we were 400 years ago, which is fine. Honestly, that doesn't necessarily need to be a downer. We have 12 notes in Western music, and we still get Mahler's Fifth Symphony, and we still get Purple Rain. We can make a lot of cool things happen with a finite number of building blocks, but I think one of the things that we're not going to be able to escape from is that these fundamental building blocks are going to do what they're going to do. And that is set by the physics and chemistry of food and by the biology of what we can digest. So when we look at plants, some of the good news is plants are Swiss Army knives. Plants versus animals are much more chemically expressive. Animals are just big hunks of muscle and meat that can be aggressive and just bludgeon our way through just about anything. Plants don't have the luxury of movement in that way, and so they have to defend themselves, court lovers, and seed the flora to the new generation through chemistry. And all of that chemistry can be delicious. And so a plant can do a bunch of different things. The stage is set for plants to be more exciting in terms of variety of taste, texture, aroma, color, etc. But we are projecting some very human things onto plants right now that I think are limiting the potential for innovation. It's lowering the ceiling on what we can do with plants. The most egregious of the things that we're doing right now is we are obsessed with protein. We have a shared cultural addiction to the idea of protein right now that is making a lot of plant-based food hit some hiccups as it's coming more and more to the mainstream. Plants are really good at a ton of different things. Protein is just about the worst fight you can pick for plants to go pound for pound against animals. Again, animals are basically moving hunks of functionally dynamic protein. Plants use proteins for all kinds of stuff, but they're far more dilute sources of protein than muscle is. And that protein does very different things. So if what we're doing is pitting plants in a one-dimensional fight against animals for protein alone, it becomes a much tougher fight than it needs to be. We're basically prying all of the keys off of the piano and just leaving plants with like B flat, and they're just going B flat, B flat, B flat, B flat. One of the ways that we are going to break through and get to a new level of global super mainstream plant-heavy food is by allowing all of those things to come back into play. To put it bluntly, we have spent a lot of time and energy dressing plants up in a dollar store hamburger costume, and that's great. We need that. We can get into that later, but it is time to allow plants to show off all of the finery and regalia of all of the complexity that they were born with. So moral of the story there, plants can do a lot of stuff naturally. We are going to move forward as a food culture when we let plants be plants. One caveat to that, going back to flavor, plants have a stacked deck in terms of chemistry and physics and what they can do for us in the kitchen. What they can do for us in our minds is still beholden to who we are. And as long as there is a massive contingent of humans who grew up like I did, having big slabs of meat at just about every meal, there is a nostalgia mountain that we're going to have to climb. And there's a couple ways of going about that. Yes, of course, the most logically straightforward way to do it would be to attempt alchemy. What if we could get plants to taste and look and smell and feel and behave like pork? As we've seen, that is not an endeavor that can be nailed perfect 10 out of 10 no notes, no flaws. It is also not an endeavor without a ton of resources that need to be expended to succeed. When we are really absolutist and we want to be really black and white and everything is either beef jerky or it is fully vegan, there's very little room for compromise. There is less room for innovation. And so until the generation that includes me, frankly, just dies off and we are replaced by future generations who have been weaned culturally from having so much nostalgic tie-in to hunks of animal protein, we're going to have to be willing to explore more middle ground. Yes, it is useful and very important to have fully plant-based analogs that can stand in for those who are at a point in their journey where they're ready for that. It is going to be equally important to diversify our approach and embrace the, whatever you want to call it, the flexitarian, the plant-heavy, but not plant-exclusive lifestyle. Because if you want to make a carrot taste like beef, you have to pretty much strip away everything that makes that carrot good. If you want to allow a carrot to taste as good as a carrot can, that's great. And if you want to bring some people from across the aisle, so to speak, one of the most compelling ways to do that still remains to season it with the trappings of the animal X factor. Rather than consuming a pig a week, let's consume a pig once a quarter. Let's consume a pig once a semester. Let's use animal products, as many cultures around the world have done for centuries, as seasoning to capture the X factor that some people have a need for embedded in their medium nostalgia. And by that route, open up some new pathways to allowing plants to be plants with a little bit of help and maybe a little bit of eyeliner from the animal world. So, some thoughts.
Great, thanks, Chef. For those of you who haven't seen Allie's book, Ingredients, it is probably one of the most definitive texts on how food ingredients interact and work with each other and respond to the manipulations that we do as chefs. And I think a lot of people have been influenced by folks like other food scientists and all that, but Allie's book is illustrated in a really incredible text, and if you've not seen it, please do take a look at it, because I think it underscores this idea that we have to understand the interplay of ingredients and how they respond to manipulations as we cook, which opens up a whole new pathway of creativity. So thank you, Chef, I appreciate it. So
Sure.
Turning our attention now to Chef David Tanis, Allie has just described, sort of how science can be a platform for creativity, but there's also a lot of creativity that's yet undiscovered out there, or has been discovered in pockets of the world. And David, one of the things you typically do in your writing and in your restaurants is you sort of showcase some of these things that are found around the world that are delicious, and they don't need to be modified or changed. They're just wonderful. So turn it over to you.
Well, it's true that a lot of this plant-forward eating has been happening for quite a while, and there really is nothing new under the sun. Although we'll get to that in a bit, I guess. How are we doing this, Mike? So I have a little. Can you? I'm not good with this. Can I be heard? Yes. This is fine. It's fine, yeah. Okay, so I have a little PowerPoint presentation, but it won't look like anybody else's PowerPoint presentation because it won't have any charts. But it will have a lot of vegetables. These are all images from my book that's called Market Cooking, and as opposed to Allie's book, this is not encyclopedic. It is not exactly a reference book, but it's supposed to be a book that could inspire people to go to the market and cook. The first chapter is all about alliums, really. It's all about onions and garlic and scallions and chives and all of those things that are in that allium family. I don't know, right there you have about a dozen things made with onions that are just delicious. Oh, this is kind of fun, isn't it? All right. These photographs were made by a fellow named Evan Sung, who is a New York photographer, and he's made photographs for a lot of cookbooks lately. It was really fun to work with him. Whenever I do the photographs for a cookbook, I like to cook the food myself, and I want it to taste right. I want it to smell good, because otherwise it's just a sort of an artificial photograph. I'm trying to really get the feel of the food. I've been a vegetable fan ever since I can remember. Not to say I wouldn't have a pork chop, but vegetables are such an interesting variety of things to eat. The main thing I wanted to say is the secret, really the secret of good cooking is following the seasonal calendar, so that you're not eating tomatoes in December because there aren't any good tomatoes in December, but the tomatoes in August are really, really good. Also, not a new concept. I mean, this is an old-fashioned way of cooking, but it's still, I think, it's still current in terms of what the pleasure is, what pleasure is available. I mean, the whole idea is that you go to the market, you see what looks good, you see what looks best, you go from stall to stall. Finally, you know what you're going to cook for dinner because something there is speaking to you. It's like the turnips look pretty swell today. I can get excited about turnips. Or beets. Or peppers. Or greens. Oh, greens, greens, greens. Now, of course, not everything in the book has vegetables only. Some of the dishes have a little meat added. For instance, for these with the Brussels sprouts here, we have a little pancetta. Cauliflower has the what is trending these days? That's the question of the hour. But I mean, trending. What's in style now? Cauliflower is in style. Cauliflower is a really, really versatile ingredient. And of course, the other way that you can make food taste better is by adding herbs or spices. So even something as simple as an omelet with a fistful of herbs thrown in, it becomes something completely different. And I could mention too that, well, I tell this story. I worked in a restaurant with these two guys who were cooks in the Marines, and they didn't really have, well, they didn't have much of an aesthetic sense, let's say, or they were pretty good at getting the food out, but they weren't really they didn't care that much about the details. The funniest thing that they ever did was, I came into the kitchen one day and they had decided they were going to chop all the parsley for a week. So yes, they had a pile of parsley and they worked up a sweat, and then they put all that chopped parsley in, in between two kitchen towels and squeezed all the chlorophyll out till it got dry, 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 and they were kind of pleased with themselves. But I didn't want to burst the bubble, but you know that it tastes better if you've just chopped it. All the essential oils are right there. So if you can ever chop your parsley right before you put it in the dish, that's what you're really aiming for. Legumes, beans, love them, love them, love them. The thing about a little piece of meat is, well, some of our most recent ancestors probably wouldn't be that thrilled about a plant-forward diet because they grew up on a plant-forward diet because there wasn't money to buy meat, and meat was expensive, and it wasn't really that available. But you could use a little meat to do something. You could, if you were Italian, you went to the butcher and you got like 200 grams of pancetta, and you could make a delicious pasta with the pancetta. But if you didn't happen to have the pancetta, you could still make a delicious pasta with the tomatoes that were going to go with it. There's something just about the sort of I'm just looking at these tomatoes and getting kind of hungry for tomatoes. I have to wait a few more months. But there's the sheer sort of sensual part of vegetables that really gets me. And also the beauty, the visual. Okay, good. The other thing I like to think about is that, you know, if I don't have a vegetable garden at home, then I use the market as if I did. You know, so I want to see what's growing this week, and the farmer has done all the work for you, which is kind of nice too. But in the same way, if your restaurant doesn't have a farm attached to it, you have to use the market as if you did have a farm, and that farmer just happens to be growing what you want. But you also have to remember not to ask the farmer to grow something that he can't grow, that she can't grow, or that you finally don't end up ordering all that watercress. In any case, I go to the farmer's market about 3 times a week. Right now, and most of our vegetables at the restaurant come from the farmer's market or from a few farms that we have begun to develop relationships with. For me, the best part of the day really is being at the market at the crack of dawn with the farmers and sort of appreciating what they have and getting excited about the fact that, oh my gosh, asparagus has just started. And I think I saw some rhubarb. And we're winding down. We're winding down here. I can't tell you too much more. I can show you a few more photos. And here's dessert. I think my main point, though, is just to say, get to the market and get cooking.
Well, the audience seems to have fallen a little bit silent because I think we're all drooling a little bit from looking at those photos, Chef. So those look all fabulous. So you touched on a kind of funny story, but it's, I think, critical, is this idea of how sometimes when we cook, we may not be fully aware of the interactions of the ingredients, such as the parsley example, and people who, with good intentions, trying to make their life easier, but losing sight of what happens when we manipulate and work with ingredients. And so how often when you are drawing inspiration from the market or from a dish that's you found somewhere being presented from the Mediterranean or wherever, how often do you take a look at it from the perspective of the science behind what makes this delicious? Does that ever enter it, or you just use the inspiration as it is?
Well, I don't take a terribly scientific approach. I do know that there are some chemical interactions that happen here and there. I'm more about the process of cooking. And I, of course, you know, and the tasting. And the tasting is the most important part. As you're tasting, because we taste every dish on the menu every day, and you know, the cook can have made the same dish, you know, for weeks in a row, but it's not going to be the same every day. And the ingredients aren't going to be the same every day. So you know then that, well, it needs a little acid. What will you choose? Will you choose lemon juice? Will you choose sumac? Will you choose vinegar? Those are the little decisions that you make along the way, I think, are what really makes the food exciting.
Yep, great. And Allie, when it comes to how you look at food, and certainly with your consulting work to do with Pilot R&D and your other companies, when it comes to, you know, drawing from your scientific knowledge and using that to develop an inspiration for a client, How difficult is it for you to translate that science to somebody who's really thinking about it really purely from just a food perspective without that science understanding? Do you have to really spend a lot of time addressing the technicalities of it, or are they accepting of that?
It depends on what their goals are. There are times when a client is looking to do something. I would say the main exception would be if a client's looking to do something dangerous, things need to get real science real quick, just to explain the black and white of why something isn't a good idea, why something would be too risky. For the rest of it, the science of food is something that is not alien to anybody. Even if you don't think about food in any kind of scientific terms, even if you hated chemistry in high school, we just have so much hands-on, intimate experience with food day in and day out that a lot of what I do is just providing color commentary to things that people already know in their souls, and sometimes giving them more precise language to explore it. I think my job would be a lot harder. Like I think about like Neil deGrasse Tyson or anybody who's trying to make astrophysics something tangible, something that is more accessible. It's cool to think about black holes, but all of that is really abstract, and there's a really heavy lift on the person's part who's trying to make it accessible. Explaining to people how celery works is, by comparison, much easier and a much more intuitive journey to go along, because people know food, and filling in the gaps is more straightforward.
Great. One of the things that we're looking at here at the CI is that right now, when it comes to communicating what we intend with a dish or the flavor outcomes of a dish, unfortunately, we're still working with a pretty rudimentary instrument, which is known as the recipe. And one of the things that we're trying to develop as an institution, as well as a way to help the industry, sort of relay what we know and what we've learned intuitively to another, and going beyond the recipe, but also, sort of as you've touched on, David, this idea that you have to taste as you're cooking. The ingredients are constantly changing.
You absolutely have to taste.
And those kinds of things. And so, how do we convey how close is this to what we intended beyond just that we followed the recipe? And so, Allie, are there instruments that you're aware of? You used music as a illustration in your presentation, which oftentimes I think of the music industry as being probably has been around almost as long as cooking professionally has been. And they have a lot more tools, in my opinion, to work with when it comes to conveying to each other. So are there any thoughts with regards to how those tools might be adapted to what we do with food?
I mean, again, that depends on scope. A lot of what we do with scaled food manufacturers is find ways to make up for the fact that there are not going to be human hands in every moment of the process. So measuring pH instead of relying on our perception of sourness. Measuring color, quantifying color, in case you don't have somebody that can look at whether every single cracker is golden brown or not. The instruments come in, I think, only in the situations where people don't have enough bandwidth to be able to look at everything. The human sensory system is still way better than anything we've created. There are aromas that won't register on gas chromatography setup that we can pick out as clear as day. There are variances in texture that are still impossible to put a number to. So I think there's always going to be instrumental limitations. Humans are just better. The instruments typically come in where humans can't. I will say that as far as recipes go, something that has come up from trying to make tens of thousands of cookies is our imagination as recipe writers for how things could possibly go wrong could be better folded into the recipe itself. I've found that enumerating all of the ways that a recipe can go wrong, rather than just the one string of events where a recipe could go right, is a helpful way to give some bumpers and give a little bit more orientation to somebody who's trying to recreate something.
Great. Chef Dennis, when it comes to, obviously you are driven by your incredibly knowledgeable palate and flavor memory. When you're working with young cooks or somebody you're trying to train to replicate the dishes that you know well, what kind of things do you draw from in order to help convey what exactly you're looking for beyond the recipe?
Well, I'm thinking of sense memory. It's like just, how it is, you can smell when the pasta is done. You don't really have to check because it smells a certain way when it's done, and it smells a certain way when it's not quite ready. The same, or just the smell of spaghetti cooking, sort of brings back a memory of all those times you had spaghetti as a kid. I think those are kind of important little things to check in on. But the thing about recipes is that you can give two cooks the same recipe, and there will be two different results. Absolutely two different results. Part of it has to do with the way that each person has a slightly different handwriting, but it also will have to do with whether one cook understood it better, or felt it better, and the other cook wasn't quite sure where they were going, perhaps.
Very good. So, it's obvious that while we can take inspiration from science in order to help drive our creativity in the plant-forward kitchen, or we can draw from flavor memories and examples of dishes that are already found to be plant-forward in and of themselves, we as an industry are still lacking the tools that we need in order to really help replicate flavors and to drive the inspiration and creativity that we need in order to respond to consumer audiences. We've been working here at the CI to come up with some of these tools and instruments to help convey that. This afternoon, in a sort of workshop session, I'll be presenting along with some other chefs, including Suvir Saran and David Bruno from the CIA and Scott Giambastini, a thought on terms of how do we think about the idea of flavor and taste, and how do we use a mapping tool in order to help shape flavor and fingerprint the flavors that we're developing in dishes. It's something that's in concept and development. It's not completely finished, and so this workshop really is to present what's been done so far in thinking along this avenue, and then to open up a conversation and dialogue with the audience to help us sort of complete the thought in a way that help document creativity and innovation and help drive flavor in our constant search for deliciousness in the plant-forward kitchen, which we're all here for, and so we'd love to have you join us this afternoon at 3 o'clock in the Napa Valley Vintners Theater to assist us in sort of trialing this new tool that we're developing and seeing where you help us get it to. So thank you very much.
Great. Another round of applause for our panelists here. Great. Thank you, Provost Erickson. Thank you, Allie. Thank you, Chef David. So what an incredible morning so far. Hope you've just enjoyed the inspiration and the conversations, which will be continued today, tomorrow. So we're heading into a short networking and refreshment break sponsored by Tyndall. David Tanis will be out in the atrium signing his book, The Beautiful Pictures from which you saw. And I should also mention that we do have Kyle Connaughton's book also, so if we encourage you, if you want, buy a copy here, and then we're going to be working with him to have him sign book plates that we'll be able to mail out to you. So maybe you have a copy at home and you want a signed book plate that you can include in your own copy or purchase one here. So we'll be able to offer you that, and then we'll be starting back here at 11 a.m. for our next series of general sessions. So enjoy the break, and we'll see you back soon.